between 7 to 9 people, and they'll line up that way coming to the house because it must be indicative of the wealth of the owner. Many of those trees there are well over 150 years old. Okay. So this would be the access coming up to the house, to the 3-story house. This is the original front of the house, as you see here. So as you look at the house here, don't let it mislead you from the standpoint of where the original property line goes. Because this house is the line of visit, as most houses are supposed to be facing the water. So the original property line goes beyond those trees 1.5 miles down to the water. Another 1/2 mile in that direction on the other side of the shopping center. That comprised 1,700 acres of land we talked about. I've encouraged you to go downtown and check out the Battery to see those palatial homes. There's another site I think I'd encourage you to go see. It's called the Angel Oak Tree. It is about 7 miles down here on Johns Island. It is more than 600 years old, and it is 4 times the size of this tree. Angel Oak Tree. Just put in your computers, it'll take you there. And of course, Mr. McLeod added on to the back of the house there, he was a Revolutionary War devotee. So to show his devotee to the Revolutionary War, he put in the tree there what we call his Liberty Bell. You can see a bell up there in the tree where he placed it in 1921. His Liberty Bell. So now let me tell you a little bit about some of the folks who lived here, starting with Mr. McLeod. Mr. McLeod was married twice. Unfortunately, he lost both wives. A younger wife who died in childbirth, and of course, another wife had a long-term illness, but she passed on too, leaving him with a little 6-year-old daughter named Anna. So he purchased a lady by the name of Isabel Pinckney to become the nanny for Anna. Isabel Pinckney was a very fair-skinned, biracial woman that lived upstairs on the 3rd floor with her son Daniel. Okay. After the war, Isabel Pinckney became a well-known landlord on this island. This is the 1868-69 period of time, where she ran a number of boarding homes over a period of years. The story about her son is controversial, debated. That's a true story. Because Daniel was Mr. McLeod's son, biracial child. She being biracial, he being biracial, of course. Very fair-skinned, so they raised him as a white child, educated him. He became a doctor. I think of the doctor story very well because doctors were in my family for a couple generations. I had a grand uncle who finished Howard University in Washington, D.C. in 1910. Another one who finished Meharry in 1925 in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up in the South. My education was segregated. My younger brother, Glenn, and my cousin George were among the first African students to integrate the Medical College of Charleston. They had a tough time. The resistance to integration was very hard. But they made it. They were Gullah Geechees. They were spiritual, dedicated to do and succeed. After they told named Leah at the slave mart downtown Charleston. Mr. McLeod goes there and he purchases her, brings her here without the parents. The little girl was supposed to be a playmate for his daughter. So she comes here and she has to adjust to that, being without her parents. So she came here and she did adjust because she soon realized that all the enslaved people on this plantation at the time were just like she, Gullah Geechee people. So she adapted rather quickly. But that's just the beginning of the story. The little Leah's granddaughter, Edna Richardson, was born in the parking lot there more than 100 years ago. Edna Richardson passed away in 2013 at the age of 97. When she passed away, the descendants of her family numbered more than 106 children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. Her grandchildren have been here to talk to me as a tour guide and others here to share stories about their relatives having grown up on this plantation. And that's the legacy of little Leah coming to this place a little more than 150 years ago. Now, little Leah could have left this plantation after the war in 1865. Because of relationships, she decided to stay on board. She was on board and she stayed here with the McLeod family for more than 70 years. Questions, comments, thoughts? 10-year period of time when my state, South Carolina, made every attempt in a 10-year period of time to secede from the Union. Now, why do they want to do that? They wanted to reinstate the slave trade. The slave trade made them very wealthy. The marketing, capitulation, or capitalization of slaves at that time in 1860 dollars were more than $4 billion. They couldn't do it. Meanwhile, Mr. Lincoln was elected, 1860. By the end of 1860, South Carolina found a mechanism in which to secede from the Union, becoming the first state to leave the Union. 3 months after that, they merged with the other states and formed a confederacy. 5 of them. 3 months after that, here comes the big boom boom. What's the big boom boom?
Fort Sumter.
Thank you, sir. 8 miles from here, Fort Sumter. The Confederates bombarded Fort Sumter, and the American Civil War began. Well, the Union troops tried to shut down the harbor. Charleston Harbor was the busiest harbor in the country. They tried to shut it down twice, they couldn't do it. So the Union troops retreated, they went down to Port Royal to staff up, to come back here to take over Charleston and James Island. The Confederates got word that was happening. So what they decided to do was evacuate the entire island. And they did. When that house was evacuated, other people moved into it. The first people that moved into it was the Confederate Army. They were there for 2 years. And on occasion, they would use the front yard as a hospital during the war. Around 1863, Mr. Lincoln is trying to free the slaves, so he issues the Emancipation Proclamation. And of course, that applies to certain states, certain individuals. The enslaved people of America were not freed until 1865, when the Congress issued the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, and some 4 million slaves were freed. And of course, that generated a lot of anxieties and of course a lot of logistics. Many of the missionaries up north, Massachusetts, New York State, Philadelphia, wanted to come down here and to begin conducting educational process for teaching people how to read and write. The second occupant of the house there were 2 military units. One from Massachusetts, one from New York State. Black military units came down here to help folks secure the land that had been promised them, but also to begin to teach them how to read and write. They were there for 90 days. The third and final group there was a group, were like an agency, a social service agency. They were charged by the Congress to come down here and give out land, give out food, give out clothing, teach people how to read and write, and secure the lands that had been promised them. There are more than 100 of those agencies throughout the South. And they started out very well for the first 6 months, very smoothly. But then, President Andrew Johnson, for political reasons, decided to tell all the agencies, all that land that you gave to the enslaved folks to be self-sufficient, independent. Give all that land back to the owners. There were 20 enslaved people on this property that had received 400 acres of land to be on their own and be independent. They had to give all that land back. And when that happened, Mr. McLeod, the second Mr. McLeod, moved back into the house in 1872. That event started a lot of other negative things toward the folks who've been enslaved. There was a major epidemic. Smallpox wiped out a third of the population. 2 years in a row of bad weather, hurricane weather. The grounds became mud. They couldn't plant anything. The southern states began to issue black code laws, Jim Crow laws, segregation, no voting, intimidation laws. And fourthly, that little insect, the boll weevil, devastated the cotton crop. Just wipe it out, what have you. The lookout for the folks, the outlook for the folks was pretty bad, pretty dire. They tried, what's it called, sharecropping. They tried tenant farming. Didn't work out. Became very exploitative. So what do you think they could do? Well, what do you think the folks did between 1865 and 1960? They left. Great migration. See, the arrow was going to the northeastern cities, central cities. During that period of time, more than 6 million African Americans left the South to go to other places, all the way to the West Coast. Our story here is the fact that yes, some people stayed, some people left. We tell a story about a family called the Gaithers. The Gaithers' cabin is behind me. Mrs. Gaither was born there in 1945. She left that cabin when she was 12 years old, moved into Charleston, got a high school diploma, and later on became trained as a nurse's aide. She goes into work one day and her supervisor says, Ms. Gathers, I have an assignment for you. The assignment for Ms. Gathers was to return to the plantation she was born on and become the nurse's aide for the third Mr. McLeod. Full circle. Well, he recognized the family, he recognized the name, he hires her as his nurse's aide. After working together for about a month, she goes to him and says, I want to do something for my people. So we made an arrangement for her to rent from him these first 4 cabins here. One was a food pantry she made, another was a clothing center, this was a schoolhouse, this was a church, the prayer house she's built. She'd come here twice a week and teach Bible verses, how to read. Look inside there above the fireplace, you see where she's stenciling in Bible verses as she taught a class. Now there's a survey that was done by the Georgia Historical Society a few years back, trying to figure out how many Americans go to church on Sundays? 35 to 37%. That's what I read. African Americans, according to the survey, about 39%. Gullah Geechees, 45 to 47%. Now, as your Gullah Geechee tour guide, I think I got to tell you the truth, right? I'm a work in progress. That's all I can say. 1990, Mr. McLeod reached the age of 104. That's when most people left this plantation. His 3 sisters preceded him in death. His 3 sisters and he never got married, didn't have any children. He deeded this property to the Charleston Historical Society. Changed hands several times, and one of the last people who had the property did make a mistake of trying to make this soccer fields. The community reacted to that, and that's one reason why we have it today as a historic site. So as I wrap up with you here, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Gullah Geechee people and why they survived and why they really sustained such a strong faith in themselves. One of the real survival things was the fact that, given the Parkers around here and what they did, after the Civil War, they became geographically isolated. As you look at my map here, you'll see little white letters that indicate little small islands. Many, many small islands here. There are no bridges. There are no land links. Very isolated to themselves. They didn't have to do much of anything because they lived off the water. They lived off the land, kept to themselves. Very little outside influence. They did that very well for a number of years, good 60, 75 years. But then, as progress would have it, they met up with the big RED. Real estate development. Hilton Head, Kiowa, Trip Island. Yes. Many of these islands, small islands, island palms. Some land exploitation, no question about that. But what it opened up to is the fact that the outside world began to come in. Many of the universities in this area had brought scholars from around the world that said, come help study this Gullah Geechee culture. See how it intertwines with the culture and the history of Charleston. And they've been doing that successfully for the last 10 to 12 years. So geographic isolation was one of them that they helped maintain that. The other thing is the fact that, and I've told you, they were very religious. And they had these praise houses. Even though they went to their masters' churches, when they left their churches, they went to the praise houses, conducted their own services, had a passion, a very deep faith, and believed very strongly in what we call spiritual freedom. They believe in that solely and very strongly. There were 16 of these on the island when they first started. There's still 2 operating on the island here. There were 13 in my hometown in Beaufort. There's still 2 operating down there. But the spirituality and their very strong psychological and emotional belief in that spiritual freedom made them succeed in maintaining so much African influence, what have you, and is considered being the African American group that's most closest to the African heritage of any other group in the United States. So folks, that's my story about McLeod Plantation and the Gullah Geechee people. I want to thank all of you for coming here from around the world, for being here and listening to me, even a very attentive audience.
Oh yeah.